Warning: this episode contains descriptions of sexual assault, child sexual abuse, drug use, torture, and mutilation. If you haven't listened to part 1 of the family murders, it's recommended to do so before this episode. Welcome to Australian Crime Stories. Make sure to follow on your listening platform and social media to stay up to date with the latest episodes. The murders in Adelaide didn't stop with Alan Barnes and Neil Muir. 2 more boys, 14-year-old Peter Stogneff and 18-year-old Mark Langley, would vanish under eerily familiar circumstances. As the investigation unfolds, it starts to become alarmingly clear. These crimes weren't committed by a sole perpetrator, and they aren't slowing down. Whoever these people were, they held a chilling confidence in committing such heinous crimes. Uncover the dark corners of this unique country with this chapter, The Family Murders, Part 2. This is Australian Crime Stories. Peter Stogneff grew up in a household that was anything but quiet. He was born into a large, bustling Russian-Australian family where children seemed to fill every corner of the house. His parents, Alex and Lydia, were migrants who had worked hard to build a secure, middle-class life. Lydia carried with her a blend of cultures and histories. She was of a Chinese-born Russian heritage, her soft accent colouring her speech, and her mannerisms marking her as someone who had lived between worlds. In Peter's earliest years, she was his anchor. She sang Russian nursery rhymes to soothe him, hummed melodies as she cradled him, and poured all her warmth and devotion into raising him. The Stogneff home was in Hope Valley, a suburb on Adelaide's northern fringe. In the late 1970s and early 80s, it was the picture of new suburbia. Rows of fresh brick houses, straight concrete driveways, and neatly trimmed lawns. Inside, life was lively, sometimes chaotic, always full. Alex and Lydia were raising a remarkable brood, a set of triplets, a set of twins, and 2 other boys, Peter among them. With so many siblings, the house pulsed with energy. Peter himself stood out despite his small stature. At about 160 centimeters height, he was slim, with a freckled face and a grin that often betrayed mischief. He walked with a jaunty step, carried himself with confidence, and had a cheeky spark about him. Mischievous, yes, but never cruel. To neighbours, friends, and relatives, he was a good boy. At heart, Peter was happiest at home. He wasn't one to wander far for long, preferring the comfort of family life over distance or solitude. But it was music that truly set him apart. Peter had taken to the guitar with an ease that surprised many, and he played with enthusiasm well beyond his years. He even performed pieces for the Russian community's radio program, a fact that filled his family with pride. Music seemed to flow naturally through him, and some thought it might shape his future. Still, Peter was no different from other teenagers of his age. He liked sport, enjoyed being with his friends, and thrilled at the promise of upcoming events. In 1981, what he looked forward to most was the Adelaide show, the rides, and the chance to lose himself in the excitement of it all. He was only 14, still at the beginning of his life. Thursday, August 27th, 1981. Exactly 2 years since Neil Muir's murder. For the Stogneffs, the day started just as any other. For Peter, he had planned to wag school this day. Him and his 15-year-old uncle, Ziggy, had supposedly organised to meet up at Rundle Mall. There's some confusion as to whether the plan to meet up was cancelled or not. Ziggy states that he didn't go to Rundle Mall and has no idea whether Peter did. A minor decision at the time, but one that will forever haunt Ziggy. What if he had met Peter as originally planned? Peter first leaves home in the morning to walk to school. He wore a blue sports shirt, white shoes, and had his favourite number 7 Guernsey in his hand. At some point after 11:30 a.m, he sneaks back home when no one's looking and dumps his school bag in the garage before heading back out. That evening, Alex returned from work and noticed Peter's school bag in the garage.
Why is Peter's backpack in the garage? Where is he?
No one knew. Peter was reported missing by his parents that evening to Holden Hill Police Station. The family desperately tried to make sense of his disappearance. The night before, his sisters overheard Peter on a lengthy phone call. When they asked him who he was talking to, he jokingly replied,
"My auntie."
They first assumed he was talking about his uncle, Ziggy, but it was later confirmed it wasn't him. Who was Peter talking to? Almost a year later, two friends would come forward saying they saw Peter with a man on the day he went missing. They initially didn't come forward because the picture police used was taken when Peter was a fair bit younger. As soon as they saw a more current image, they were certain it was him they saw. After sitting down at a cafe in the Tea Tree Plaza shopping centre just before midday, they noticed a man and a boy enter the cafe together. They stood out immediately because they had gone to the wrong counter to order, and a staff member directed them to sit at a table instead. The pair sat down beside the women. Shortly after, a waitress brought them a plate of hot chips and a sandwich. The man gestured for the boy to take a chip, telling him,
"Have one."
Apart from this brief remark, there was little or no conversation between them. After about 15 to 20 minutes, the man and boy left the cafe. The boy matches Peter's age, physical appearance, and the clothes Peter wore that day. The man was described as being in his mid-20s, about 180 centimeters tall, with dark hair and a solid but not overweight build. His complexion appeared tanned or darker than average. He wore a bomber-style jacket and light-coloured model-type shoes, and carried a brown purse with a loop handle. The two women privately remarked on how unusual the pair looked together, joking that
he certainly isn't his uncle.
Their account was strengthened by another detail. That same day, a woman found a set of keys in the plaza and handed them to the Woolworths manager. She later told police they matched Peter Stogneff's, identified by a distinctive wooden Australia-shaped keychain he had made. Although the manager disposed of the keys before they could be shown to Peter's family, the evidence strongly suggested they were his. Unfortunately, these witness accounts did not emerge until a year after Peter's disappearance. In the meantime, his family endured months with no answers or leads beyond the discovery of his bag and the anonymous phone call he had the night before. Like the families before them, they believed police had failed to act decisively when he was first reported missing. Detectives are still working on Alan Barnes and Neil Muir's murder. They recently lost the conviction of their main suspect, Dr. Milhouse, and need to shift focus onto someone new. They circle back to the man whose name keeps popping up, a man who Detective Hunter interviewed in relation to Neil Muir's murder and felt suspicious of: Bevan von Einem. Detectives arranged surveillance on him, tailing his movements. During their surveillance, they follow Bevan to a residence on Brown Street, Norwood. The address was instantly recognisable. It stood right beside the home of former Premier Don Dunstan. The house itself was imposing, built around 1900 with a broad veranda and wide frontage, exuding wealth. It wasn't long before someone stepped outside to meet Bevan. To their surprise, it was Magistrate Richard Brown. He climbs into Bevan's car and detectives follow them at a discreet distance. The trail led them far from Norwood, out to the dunes at Tennyson. The vehicle pulled up at a public toilet block, where the two men disappeared inside. The detectives waited. Eventually, Bevan and Richard emerged and returned to the car. The detectives reported their observations, and they were passed on to Major Crime. They were instructed that Bevan was now under close scrutiny, and it was best to let Detective Trevor Kipling's team handle the follow-up. Their part in the surveillance ended here. Mark Langley was 18, tall and striking, with dark hair, an easy smile, and wears a silver cancer pendant. He was an apprentice plumber, working on Adelaide's new Supreme Court building in Victoria Square, after a stint in Coober Pedy. He loved cars, especially his Bathurst Ford, which he kept spotless. At home, Mark was the cheeky older brother, the son who teased his mother and made his sisters scream by dropping insects into the house at Christmas. But beneath the mischief was kindness. He was devoted to his family, loyal to his friends, and protective of those he loved. That loyalty was tested in May 1981, when his cousin was abducted by bikies and subjected to an 8-hour ordeal of rape and beatings. She survived only because friends took down the number plate of her attacker's car. Mark tried to keep her spirits up.
Get a grip.
He told her gently.
Where's that fighting spirit?
But when she slept, he and a mate lay outside her bedroom door for nights on end, guarding her silently. This was who Mark Langley was. Cheeky, reckless, moody at times, but ultimately a young man who cared deeply. Saturday, 27th, February 1982, exactly 6 months since Peter Stogneff was reported missing. Mark and his family attended a birthday party in Windsor Gardens. Mark was already there, having arrived with friends. He was in good spirits, eating corn, his favourite, and joking with his sisters. He mingled freely and was among the last to leave, with his family departing around midnight. At about 1:30 a.m, Mark left the party with his friends Ian and Paula in Ian's white Datsun 1600. First they stop at a Holden Hills service station so Mark could buy cigarettes before heading into the city. They then park on War Memorial Drive near the Torrens River and sat smoking and talking. There is a minor dispute about cigarettes and Mark gets upset and leaves the car. Paula tried assuring him it was only a joke, but Mark says he wanted to be alone. Ian drives off with Paula, leaving Mark. It was more of a tease than a genuine departure, with Ian planning to return within minutes. Only when they do circle back, Mark is gone. They call out, drive around the nearby streets, and retrace their route, but he is nowhere to be seen. Monday 28th, February. Ian calls the Langley home asking for Mark. His mum, Jan, discovers his bed untouched and his car still in the driveway. Alarm bells rang immediately. Mark would never stay out all night without word. His dad, David, calls Holden Hill Police Station to report him missing. He gets a dismissive response. The next day, David and Ian go into Holden Hill Police Station to stress the situation. Police yet again dismiss the report as a typical boys will be boys situation, but luckily, an experienced detective overhears and steps in to take the report seriously. It was the first time police had treated a missing person case linked to the family murders with genuine urgency. Major Crime is quick to act. They target Adelaide's gay beats for information, questioning sex workers, waiters, and others who moved in those circles. Rumours swirled of lures being used, fake car breakdowns, parties with drugs and alcohol, and women used to bait young men into cars. They also canvassed the area Mark was last seen. One woman reports hearing footsteps on the riverside path from her parked car sometime after 1:30 a.m. It's possible this could have been Mark who was deliberately avoiding Ian and Paula when they returned, still angry. Days later, a man named Robert Windsor is reading the newspaper when he sees a photograph of Mark Langley. He was certain he had seen the same young man hitchhiking around 4 a.m. on Hackney Road, not far from where Mark had last been with his friends. Robert slowed down in his car, but decided against stopping after noticing Mark looked frightened. Moments later, he sees another car pull over beside Mark. He assumes he had accepted the lift. Monday, 8th of March, 1982, a week after Mark Langley vanished. Among the scrubland at Summertown, beside 3 tall television towers, Wayne Bolton and his father were at work. They were weed contractors and spent their days spraying blackberry infestations along rough dirt tracks. It wasn't long until they encounter a rotten stench. At first, they thought little of it. People dumped rubbish along the roadsides often enough, but as Wayne investigated, he realized what he was seeing: a human body. Forensics arrived at the scene. The corpse lay just a few feet below the embankment and showed signs of decay, tissue breaking down, maggots feeding, and the face and skull already succumbing to the elements. He had been dumped hastily, washed, redressed, but not with care. His jeans were belted the wrong way, fastened but not zipped. From the waist up, he was naked, his blue satin shirt and silver cancer pendant gone. The autopsy was performed by forensic pathologist Dr. Derek Pounder. The cause of death could not be determined, but he estimated Mark had died 3 to 8 days earlier. He notes the familiar disturbing details: dilation of the anus and tearing of the rectum caused by instrumentation either before or just after death. Then the most shocking discovery, a long abdominal incision beginning 5 centimeters above the genitals and running upwards for more than 16 centimeters. The wound had been shaved, crudely stitched with polyester filament and covered with hospital-style sticking plaster. It was as though someone had performed a grotesque, ritualistic parody of surgery. Detectives theorized this was to retrieve whatever object they used on their victims that had potentially gotten lost inside Mark. Toxicology tests revealed drugs in Mark's system, diphenhydramine and methaqualone, also known as mandrax. These were the same substances previously found in Alan Barnes and Neil Muir. Entomologist Beryl Morris, known among police as the Maggot Lady, examined the insect life on Mark's body. Her analysis indicated he was not dumped immediately after death, but several days later, likely on the evening of 2nd March or early on 3rd March 1982. The discovery of this murder deepened Adelaide's sense of dread. This is now the 3rd young man found brutally murdered and dumped. How many more will they discover? Police delivered the dreaded news to Mark's father, David, that evening.
The body of a young man has been found. We are 99% sure it is your son.
For David and Jan Langley, the confirmation shattered their world. David, a knockabout plumber who loved beer, barbecues, and his family, became obsessed with finding his son's killer. He chain-smoked whilst haunting pubs, listening for any slips of the tongue.
Everyone I meet, I think may be the killer.
He admitted. Police told him Mark may have been alive for 12 hours before death. The thought tortured him. Could his boy have asked for mercy? Was he given none? The family kept Mark's room untouched, created a photo album from his birth to his gravesite. His headstone read, "In loving memory of Mark Andrew Langley. Tragically taken 28th February 1982. Aged 18. Loved son of Jan and David, brother to Tracy and Robin. Even Mark's prized Bathurst Ford could not remain. It was sold and sent interstate, too painful of a reminder." Detectives worked tirelessly, their files swelling with statements from young men who told disturbingly similar stories. Some said they were forced into cars. Others had been hitchhiking when they were lured inside with promises of alcohol, drugs, women, and a party. They described drinking from an offered can, feeling suddenly drowsy, then being handed no-dos to keep them awake. Many remembered nothing after that, losing track of hours, sometimes an entire night. They would wake in a strange house, confused and disoriented, unable to recall how they had arrived. Hungover, foggy, and in pain, especially in their anal and other sensitive regions, they found themselves partially undressed. The feelings that followed were consistent: shame, fear, and disgust. Yet when police officers recorded these statements, they often dismissed them. To them, these were just young blokes out on the town, experimenting, perhaps pushing the boundaries of their sexuality. In hindsight, investigators suspected there were many more who never came forward at all, too reluctant or embarrassed to speak. Soon after Mark's body was discovered, someone calls the police with a precise tip. Bevan von Einem picks up and assaults young men by the river. It's time to interview him again. In late March, a month after Mark's body was recovered, detectives arrived at Bevan's workplace, Pipeline Supplies. He greeted them politely, standing tall in plain, unremarkable clothing. He is cool, composed, and unruffled. His answers followed a familiar pattern. Yes, he was gay and known to frequent the river beat, but no, he had never met Mark Langley. Similar to the last interview, Bevan offers an odd diversion. He claimed he had once met a man, Lebanese perhaps, who told him He'd been held up at gunpoint along the Torrens on the very night Mark Langley disappeared. And what about his own movements on the nights of 27th and 28th February? Bevan said he had been drinking alone at home until around 11 p.m, when he decided to go out. To avoid a booze bus, he took the quiet back streets, driving familiar routes before stopping in Hindley Street opposite the City Hotel to sit in his car and watch people pass by. From there, he says he drove to the Mars bar, where he remained parked outside until 2 a.m, just sitting and watching. He then returned home, again by the back streets, arriving around 3 a.m. The investigation continues. Time passes. June 1982, 3 months since Mark Langley's body was found. A farmer named Robert Hart is spraying weeds in a bare paddock at Middle Beach when he spots what looks like human bones, but he can't be sure. He had cleared the same land months earlier, returning to burn off scrub. This time, there was no mistaking what he found. Police determined a body had been discarded near Middle Beach Road, likely dumped from a car boot. The task of the autopsy falls to Dr. Derek Pounder, an experienced forensic pathologist. He inspects the bones where they lie before removing them for detailed study in the laboratory. Fire, the elements, and the long passage of months have conspired against the remains. They have stripped away flesh, erased vital evidence, and denied science the chance to search his organs for answers. What he can see, however, is grotesque. The corpse has been deliberately cut apart. The lower vertebrae are sawn clean through, the torso separated from the pelvis. Both femurs are severed, the legs missing entirely. The head and chest are still attached to the upper body, but all soft tissue is gone. Dr. Pounder concludes that Peter was likely transported in 2 separate bags, and if he had been clothed, the fire that swept through the area destroyed every trace. There are no possessions, no fibers, no chemical evidence. All that can be determined is that the skeleton belongs to a boy, around 160 centimeters tall and aged somewhere between 12 and 16. The enormity of the investigation becomes clear. Between August 1981 and May 1982, nearly 600 boys of this age range had been reported missing across the country. Yet when these bones are found, only one remains unaccounted for. Forensic odontologist Dr. Kenneth Brown examines the teeth and confirms the match through dental records. The skeleton is that of Peter Stogneff. Lydia refuses to believe it.
It is not him. This is not my son. He is only 14 years old. He has hurt no one. Give us more proof.
Her denial became a mantra, spoken through grief, whispered in prayer. Birthdays were marked with candles he never blew out. She moved like a ghost through her days, faith offering no rest from sorrow. Peter's funeral is held a year after his body is discovered, but Lydia still cannot let go. She insists she needs more than expert opinion, more than charts and records. Peter had a chipped front tooth, she reminds them, but the tooth is missing. To her, that absence is everything. She demands her son's body be exhumed. Only then, with absolute certainty, will she accept it is him. Dr. Brown shows her the teeth himself. They overlay photographs of Peter's known dentition against the skull, superimposing a match. They tell her it is her son, but Lydia still can't accept it. She requests for DNA testing. Her request is denied. Lydia won't speak of Peter's death. Instead, she calls it his vanishing. His headstone reads in Russian, "Peace I leave with you, peace I give to you." By mid-1982, Major Crime had 4 victims on their books: Alan Barnes, Neil Muir, Peter Stogneff, and Mark Langley. The cases were no longer being treated in isolation. Investigators had flagged the consistencies publicly, and in private they were working from the theory that Adelaide had a serial offender, or possibly a small group of offenders, operating in the city. The hallmarks were there. Each victim was a teenage boy or young man, last seen around the city, or in the Torrens precinct, with 3 of the victims last seen hitchhiking. All bodies apart from Peter's, which had lost most of its evidence, had drugs in their system and excessive damage to their anus. The bodies were also washed, redressed, and dumped well away from where the attacks had taken place. In the cases of Neil, Peter and Mark, mutilation added another disturbing link. This was more than coincidence. The coroner would later describe the similarities in the manner and circumstances as strikingly close, a view that echoed what detectives had already been saying in press appeals. They weren't dealing with random one-offs. They were tracking a linked series of homicides. Inside major crime, the belief was already forming that this was not the work of one perpetrator alone. Detectives were discussing the possibility of a network, a small circle of connected people who hunted, drugged, and abused vulnerable young men. One of their main suspects at this point of the investigation was Bevan von Einem. However, they also had two other men as persons of interest in the murders. In fact, police already had these two men on file for drugging and sexually assaulting young men and boys before the murders even began. After the discovery of the drugs in Alan's system, these two men immediately became suspects since the first murder and have continued to be strong suspects as the murders continued. Unfortunately, due to reasons even lawyers can't make sense of, the identity of these two men are still suppressed to this day by Australian law. Despite the two men being widely known and discussed within Adelaide, journalists, authors, and broadcasters cannot legally publish or broadcast their names. It's a frustrating roadblock in being able to effectively tell this story in its full truth, and the reasoning for the suppressions remains an alarming mystery. Legally speaking, there are no genuine grounds to continue the suppressions. Who and why are these known suspects of drugging and sexually assaulting young boys and men being protected? Given the suppression orders, the two suspects have gained the pseudonyms Mr. R and MGL. This is how we will reference these two men moving forward. We will try to include as much information as legally possible. Besides Mr. R and MGL, detectives also pursued other suspects within this network. Men connected to Adelaide's gay nightlife, some with access to sedatives like Mandrax, men with medical or paramedical knowledge, given the surgical style mutilations, and men with professional or social standing, whose connections made them difficult to probe. It was a complex web that kept growing, revealing an entire community within Adelaide that systematically drugged, trafficked, and sexually assaulted young men and boys. They all helped each other. Doctors gave the predators drugs to render their victims unconscious. The predators also supplied the drugs to addicted trans women, and in return, the women would help lure the boys for them. They also used troubled and vulnerable youth to help look after the barely conscious victims, and in return, they would get their time with them. Then there were the rich and powerful men who would have these boys delivered, presumably for a fee. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. As a detective described it, it was like one big happy family. The pieces were coming together and the cases against their suspects were building, but the horror was not over. On Sunday 5th June 1983, 1 year and 3 months after Mark Langley's body was found, another young boy would go missing. This time, multiple people witness his forced and quick abduction by a group of people as he screams. Want to continue this crime story? Listen to The Family Murders, Part 3, out now for subscribers.